I can't see any of you out there because you're in the dark, but thank you. I'm Martha Teichner, and welcome back to another year's Conversations. And with me today are the creative team for Ruinous Gods. And we have Lisa Schlesinger, we have Maya Zabib, we have Leal Shaker, and Omar Abi Azhar. I'm so sorry. I've gotten it wrong now about 4 times. I apologize. Anyway, here we are, and I want to start with asking Lisa, who wrote the libretto, why is it called Ruinous Gods? Where did that come from?
Do I need this closer?
You can just pull it around, move it around.
Ruinous Gods came from a line from Antigone, from an old translation I read once upon a time. It was referring to the part where Antigone is buried, and the chorus says, I'm totally paraphrasing, but for this, for sending the wrong people to the underworld, people who are meant to be in the living world, the gods will chase you, and the Furies will chase you, the ruinous gods and Furies will chase you. And I just kind of remembered that phrase, and I thought it may come back to me one day. And
And how this opera addresses the lives and existences of people who have been dislocated, who have been forced to flee their homes, and the children who are traumatized by that, as well as the adults. How does the Ruinous Gods and the relationship to being chased by the Furies, how does that come into play in terms of what we're supposed to learn from the opera?
Well, it's not as direct as Antigone being buried alive, but there's a kind of liminality to displacement that's not here accepted into the world that most of us know, and it's not, it's not a death sentence. It's a strange space that we have names for different forced displacements, but we don't talk about it. So it has to be metaphorical. Like what those gods are, we don't know. Like each of us has our idea of what gods are. So it's not a hit it on the head answer to the question.
So are the people who are affected by dislocation the victims of it? Are they the ones involved with that, or who gets chased by the Furies? Is it the people who don't look at them as people with histories and lives and individuality and take them in?
Well, I think it's an invitation not to have black and white thinking. It's an invitation to recognize that all of us have our own Furies. We all have things that chase us, both to do things that are wrong or crazy or look or appear to be outside of what we would think of as sane. So it's not like those gods are prescriptive, like that they're punishing someone. But there's an idea in the libretto and in the opera that we pass things forward through time, through our bodies, through our memories, through the ways we tell stories, through the way we interact with each other. It's not a definitive, these are bad gods and they punish you, and this is a good god and it punishes you. I know that we kind of live in a culture where we often think that way, but it's asking us to think more in a more complex manner about what's chasing. In other words, you could think from a child's perspective, they may sometimes feel punished, or on the other hand, they may respond by falling asleep, and the parents feel like, what have I done wrong? So those gods are a question mark of gods. They're a question mark of what are the forces that impact us.
Where did this all start? How did this project with you and Leal begin?
The original impulse for the whole long project began in 2014, 2015 when the Syrian war happened and boats and boats and boats were coming to Greece, which is a place I lived for a long time and consider close to my heart, and I consider home in a way. And seeing that connection at that juncture with the constant dislocation of people somehow sent me into the world of the metaphor of the Greek myths and the metaphors of the Greek myths, which I'd been thinking about anyway. And so I did a project called Iphigenia Point Blank, and it was an adaptation of the character of Iphigenia at Aulis, and how she sacrificed for war. And Leal came into that project through her husband, Kenan Azmeh, who composed the music. And we met and we worked well together. And at that point, when Ruinous Gods came to me subsequently, I knew she was the person to write the music.
And how did you work? What was your method?
Well, I should say that the original idea, Ruinous Gods, met its idea while I was researching Iphigenia Point Blank. And that was through an article that Rachel Aviv wrote for The New Yorker, and it was about children with resignation syndrome, where because of trauma, children fall asleep. And it had been diagnosed in Sweden, and when I read about it, I really felt like this belongs on the stage. And I also felt it somehow in my body, like it was a feeling I needed to investigate for myself. And in reading and researching, I realized that I felt children must have had this forever, not just in Sweden in this one moment, but did they have it in all different kinds of geographies, and we just didn't have the doctors there or the concern there to diagnose it. So there was something about the sensitivity of that and the innocence of children that I felt was a match for Leal's spirit and her soul. So that's how I knew I wanted to ask her.
So, Leal, with that introduction to you, how would you describe how you write music? What strains, what influences you have, and how that comes together the music in this has a very kind of almost dreamy quality at times. And what's in your head? What are the things coming together in the way you write?
Usually when I'm writing for a text, which is an exercise that is very different from just writing a piece of music for the end of it to be just musical. The process of writing for a text is extremely different because it's really about threading a narrative that is parallel to the text and highlighting some elements of dramaturgy that are not in the text but that are in the subtext, that are implicit. There's a way for music to convey emotions in a contrapuntal way where you can have a thread that is the obvious one, but then there's also another thread happening at the same time. And there's elasticity, and there's also the factor of the rhythmicity of the text itself. Every text has its own rhythmical component that is proper to the language, proper to words, that I also take into account and try to stretch out and convey as well. And then there's just also the language in which I write, which is naturally informed by a lot of influences. Whether it is symphonic music, orchestral music, Western classical canon, or the more contemporary canon of opera, but also Arabic maqam, jazz, free improvisation. I think those elements have given me a factor of fluidity that I'm comfortable writing in, of rhythmical fluidity that I think naturally marries a text very, very well.
Is it when you're, I think of Arabic music as being built differently in terms of its structure than what we think of as European Western music. How do you deal with that difference in the two kind of vocabularies?
It is very different in the way that it manifests. There's it's much more melodically driven than, say, a piece of music written for the National Symphony Orchestra, where things are much more vertical in nature. But I think at the end, all music comes down to the same essence, which is all music within itself, whether it's a piece of melody or a chord or even a rhythmical pattern. All of these cells of music contain a complete and wholesome musical information that is basically the spectrum, the harmonic spectrum around that melody or that rhythmical pattern or that chord. There's melodies that are heard and unheard. And I think beyond all of that, there's also that tendency to categorize music and confine it in different genres. And I think as we move forward, and the silver lining of growing up as a musician in this world is that those categories become obsolete. And I think I'm far from being the only musician who feels that way. I think many musicians of this day and age feel similarly about what musical categories and genres are, and how irrelevant it is when you are just simply in the act of creating, in the act of pouring out a musical idea.
So essentially you're saying that music has become much more just cosmopolitan in its conception as opposed to being one particular vocabulary.
I believe so, yes. I believe that as musicians today, we are much more informed by different vocabularies than we might have been 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 100 years ago.
Now, explain your background and how, in a sense, it relates to the subject matter and sort of informs the type of music that's in this opera.
So, having grown up in Lebanon, of course, it is a given to me that the subject matter is very close to my heart, and that I've experienced, and also that I've borne witness to other people around me experiencing these waves of forced migration.
Because of the war.
Because of the war, because of the occupation, because of the recurring attacks on the country, of course. So this is not something that has happened once or twice or thrice. It is something that is actually inherent to the build of the country, almost ingrained in the DNA, I think, of the whole of the region. Because we have been in such because of the geographical nature of where we are in the world, having been a crossroads for many civilizations, many histories crossing over. And so I think by nature, that idea of continuous leaving, of continuous replacement has been something that has been in the psyche, in the collective history of basically everyone in that region. So
has it affected your life in any way? Having this thing in the back of your being?
For sure, I think it has to some extent. It's been part of my history, and it's been part of the stories I carry, not just mine, but those of my ancestors, and probably the stories that I will also give to my child. And that is, I think that would be, again, I think that is more than my personal history. I think it is a history that is just shared naturally with my community. The idea of displacement or of migration or of relocation, that is basically in the story and in the continuity of all families, of all generations. So of course that's why I felt natural resonance and understanding to the story that Lisa was trying to say. Yeah.
Now, Maya and Omar, their titles are director and dramaturg, both of them for the production. They are also from Lebanon, but not necessarily ancient. Your background maybe originated someplace else, but how has this sense of dislocation and being in Lebanon affected you and the kind of theater that you've done for many years?
I think in every Lebanese house, there's at least one person who is living somewhere else. And most of these migrations are economic ones, a lot of them. But it's also some kind of a forced migration, I would say, because at some point when it becomes very difficult to live in a country where, there are not a lot of opportunities. For example, Layal had to travel to France to study music. I had to travel to London to study theater. So because of the Civil War also, there are not so many opportunities for development in the arts. There was a kind of a fracture in the history and in the development in the country. And so every house and every home has a history in relation to migration. My family, my great-grandfather came to Venezuela.
Venezuela?
Yes.
Huh.
They used to just jump on a boat and go. And my other grandfather went on the boat and then decided to leave and came back. My father also worked in the port, carrying luggage when he first came from the south of Lebanon to Beirut. And there was one point also where he almost left. So there's always this longing of travel in our country, and it's even in the history that it's
the Phoenicians.
The Phoenicians. So it's about always going somewhere, either getting rich in terms of money, but also in terms of culture. So my family also lives here. I have my brothers live in Florida. My father passed away in Florida. So there's somehow always this relationship with a need to travel, and sometimes it's forced.
And Omar, tell your family story.
My mother comes from a family who ran from an Armenian family who ran away from the genocide.
Armenian from the genocide.
Yes. So we had this relation to displacement since we were children, because also there is a tradition of transmission of the wound in families in Lebanon. So they always speak about from where you are coming and what are your origins. And so it's something that we inherited somehow through storytelling, through way of living. Also, I speak, for example, fluently French. I speak French better than Arabic because my mother used to speak French in school because kids used to make fun of her Arabic. So she stopped speaking Arabic very young, so she started speaking only French, and she translated me French language more than Arabic. So I'm more fluent in French than in Arabic. But also to come back to that dislocation, today I realized something about our relation to the city. And Lebanon is a collapsed country since we were born. We were born in a collapsed city, mainly. Beirut is a collapsed city. It's a city that doesn't exist. It's a city in ruins. Even after the construction was an elusive sensation of peace. So to stay in Lebanon, we all retracted from that reality, making ourselves believe that Beirut is the most beautiful city in the world. And we isolated ourselves sometimes a lot during sleeping and partying and imagining that we are living in the most beautiful city in the world. But if you come from outside and you have a change of perception and not living in that world, in that magical world that you lived, you are living in the bubbles, you look at the city and you see a destroyed city. You see a poor city, a dirty city. You see corrupted people, corrupted government. But in a way, we built a whole magical world where Lebanon is full of butterflies.
Mythology.
Exactly like the libretto that Lisa wrote.
I'm hearing two things from all of you that are very real in the opera. Number one, the sense of the invented mythology and how the things you carry with you when you're dislocated and so on and so forth. And the other part, how there is a generational inheritance of the effects of the dislocation. You write, I am your mother, but I'm paraphrasing, I am your mother now, but I was your daughter and I was your mother. And it's as if you pass down the trauma of dislocation. But again, you carry with you remembering the poppy garden in the back and that sort of thing. Talk about that.
It's interesting because when you now describe Beirut, I had a flashback. We moved back. I was born in France because that's where my parents relocated to during the Civil War. And of course, growing up, these are actually my very first musical memories. We would listen to Fairuz and Nasr Shamsuddin and Wadia Safi, and that's also how we learned Arabic also as kids. We just like sing these songs, and most of them had to do with the beauty of Lebanon. It had to do with what a beautiful country we are from.
Once upon a time, the Paris of the Middle East.
Exactly, all of that. And so we grew up, my brothers and I, with this fantasized lost paradise that one day we would go back to. And then when we did go back, I remember being 7 years old, and I remember the drive from the airport to my grandfather's house. My grandfather came to pick us up from the airport. And I remember looking out the window and feeling car sick and looking at everything gray. Like it dawned on me that this is the paradise I used to listen to, I used to dream about in those songs, and I felt almost fooled. Like, how come this is the place that we were singing about and dreaming about? This is the place we're coming back to, and there was a huge dissonance with what I thought I was coming back to and what it really looked like.
And how does that figure into what the people in the opera are experiencing as they're in refugee camps and maybe coming close to drowning in a boat at sea or traveling to the Mexican border across 3 countries in Latin America?
I think there's a kind of, to give credit to the ugliness of Beirut, this ugliness is real. There's something about it. And we always talk about leaving, going somewhere else, and we're privileged because we can get visas and can travel and have, we know people who can hire us maybe. But we stay in this country and in Beirut because there's a kind of realness where you face the horror head on, like it's in front of you. Mm-hmm. And when you are in such situations on a daily basis, you feel very much alive.
Yeah.
And if you take this to the extreme of living in a camp, which is not our case, but if you take it to the extreme of living in a camp, like the camps we've been to in Lebanon or in Calais, which is a horrifying place, you can see how people build lives, build realities that are good for them at that moment. There was a church in Calais, there was a mosque, there was a library, there was a theater built out of,
And these are people living in tents and temporary shelters.
Absolutely, and every day they're trying to escape this place, but somehow they create something within that horrible mud filled place where they can live. And every day they rebuild it. A lot of the times the police would come and remove the restaurants, not the religious places, but a lot of the places they've built, and they rebuild. So there's a kind of connection to reality that is very satisfying.
The people have the resilience that they bring to just trying to maintain their dignity in those places.
But also because, we don't live in a great world at the moment. Somehow, when you live in such difficult places, you feel that you are, facing the horrors and you're doing something. Whereas sometimes when you're in a very comfortable situation, you feel empty. So there's a kind of, drive for life that is overwhelming, and it's beautiful to watch sometimes and shocking. So
all three of you have actually worked with people who are displaced?
Yeah, we worked for we still work with, we worked with all the refugees in the 18 Palestinian camps in Lebanon. We work with refugees on the borders of France and UK and Serbia. And what also to add up on what Maya was saying is that in those places you feel that you are very close to humans. It's where you feel a human at the rise of your humanity, more than in any fancy restaurant, more than in any hotel, more than in any clean street you walk in downtown. You feel that humanity is here, and we are all in our bubbles, filled with artifice, filled with fictions. Why the beginning of the new humanity and new society reside in those humans' dream, in the dream of Hala, where everything starts with friendship, everything starts with freedom, everything starts with dreaming of flying. And this is where we start to build our new societies.
And that's in the opera.
Yes.
All of that, this sense of that hope and dreams can exist even in a refugee camp.
Yeah, absolutely.
Without judging our differences, because all the characters, for example, in the opera are different, but there is not at a single moment where we are pointing a difference between the character doesn't point a difference between each other. And it's like that in refugee camps, where different countries, sometimes at war between each other, humans are cohabitating, 12 different cultures, 12 different languages, 12 different countries are cohabitating and rebuilding a society from their dreams of a better life.
Huh. And what happens? You said that it would, like at places like Calais, the guards can come along and try to destroy the camp. What happens then?
Well, in Calais situation, they destroyed the whole camp, and people were relocated to different cities in France. They were allocated with colors. I remember that was the thing. And
bracelets.
Yeah,
like bracelets of
it's
colors.
like the trackers.
Yeah, in the opera, the characters wearing the big
bird
things
trackers
around their ankles.
So they get some kind of identification, and they go somewhere. And they enter into the system. Some of them not. Some of them were returned. It depends on the situations. But mostly these people in Calais wanted to go to the UK, not stay in France. Yeah. So it was a kind of a forced placement. So again, it's about borders and papers and government IDs.
So the whole bureaucracy, even though you don't know the language, and all you can do is try to figure out the mechanics of getting to where you want to go.
Yeah.
Did any of you ever encounter children who were victims of resignation syndrome, who fell asleep or had some other kind of traumatic, whether it's psychosomatic or whatever kind of effect of being taken across the Mediterranean in a leaky boat or
For
fleeing
myself,
war?
never as somebody diagnosed with this syndrome, but I can remember in camps and still nowadays in camps in those waiting period, sleep is something constant. That means that whenever you walk in the camp and if you enter any tent, there is somebody sleeping. And there is, even when we in Lebanon, for myself, when the situation is bad in Lebanon and I don't know what to do with my daughter, with my money, with my family, and I feel stuck in Lebanon, the first reaction I do is that I go and sleep. So, of course, if I go and sleep for 1% of the problem that they have at that moment, sleep is something where the less things that you, the less hide away, is it the correct word, for you in crisis situation, and it's sometimes wishing to die also.
Well, Lisa, you wrote that in the opera you said that sleep is the brother of death. And I mean, in terms of resignation syndrome, what's known about it? I mean, is it close to death? And the characters in the opera talk about, Crow talks about, sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't, sometimes they live, sometimes they die.
Well, I mean, I'm not an original thinker. I make collages of literature, life, and myth and story. I mean, the sleep is death's brother is, also from the ancient Greeks and their myths, and some fly out, some return is biblical. It's a very biblical idea. So in a way, again, nothing in this opera is literal. It's very metaphorical, but there's some research on resignation syndrome, and the way it sort of appeared most publicly in Sweden with the doctors there and diagnoses, and it was related mostly to children from the Baltic region who had come and they had acclimated and learned the language and felt really comfortable in their communities, and their parents had not acclimated and didn't learn the language and were kind of in a state of waiting for the asylum papers as a source of security and comfort. But the children became the conduit. They were the ones who could read the papers, had to wait for the letters, but again, there was an intuitive sense in the children too, because sometimes they would have this feeling that they weren't going to get asylum and they would fall asleep. So when I began this work, what they'd known is some children fell asleep for a day, days, weeks, but there were children who fell asleep for years.
Really?
Yes, and that's when they realized this is an extreme situation. And there are other cases where communities experience these kind of phenomena across communities, usually with younger people. But, yeah.
But it's children, not adults.
Yes.
And is there any speculation in the research as to why?
Well, there are these areas in neurology where we talk about psychosomatic, and what does that mean? And what does the mind do to the body? And why do we separate them? And so what is it about our neurological systems that would shut down to protect us? I mean, in a way, if you say it like that, it makes perfect sense. You don't really need more research than that. I think our neurological systems could shut down, and we could support our neurological systems and wake ourselves up, which is, again, why I return to music, because I think music has that capability.
Have they determined anything about what, if kids seem to be well adjusted and then it hits, what triggers it at that point? Is it that they just can't take it anymore, or is it that they finally feel somewhat secure so it's safe to go to sleep, or do they have any clue as to what triggers it?
They have speculation that they feel safe, they feel that they won't get asylum, and they'll be forced to leave.
And they'll lose that sense of safety.
Yes.
Huh. Did the doctors in the opera, the two medical doctors, the characters, seem very harsh, and they want to take the sleeping child away from her mother? Did that actually happen?
There is one study where that was discussed in the study, and it's very what's the word? It's not reader friendly, let's say. But in this study, they did say that the phrases are pulled from the study, that separating the child from the family because of the family distress, the parents' distress. There was a feeling that their distress caused the distress in the children. And I use that as a metaphor because we also talk this way often about mothers who don't have the resources to be good mothers, and how we treat their children versus mothers who we feel do have the resources to be good mothers. So it's kind of cultural. We have these ideas about what a parent or a mother can offer their child.
You say in the opera, there's a line about, I am your mother, I am your home. And how does that play into this whole issue of resignation syndrome?
Well, I'm not sure there's more to say about I am your mother, I am your home. I think we find our homes in each other. And the first relationship is between the mother and the child. There's so many, yeah. But we also find our homes in our friends, in our lovers, in our children, in our parents, our communities. So,
Well, you were mentioning the story the other day when we were talking about the kid. You were going to clown school, and you met a Turkish kid, and his situation, and what happened to him.
Yes, yes, I was working in a clown school in Turkey, and one of the children that I was working with there, he, a few months after I left, he passed away from a heart attack.
And he was how old?
He was 12 years old. And to me, it's to me, he died of heartbreak, and I can't interpret it otherwise. Because
what were his circumstances?
He was a child that was in a heightened situation of distress, and
Was he from a big family?
he was. He had a lot to take care of. He had siblings to take care of. Prior to forced displacement, he was a boy in school, and he actually had an extreme musical talent. So, of course, his whole identity was shuffled around. Because of that forced displacement, he became the caretaker of his family. He had to do a lot of physical labor, working in construction, taking care of his younger siblings. But he kept that margin of freedom that was important to him, that he found in the circus school. So even though he was physically exhausted, he found it in him to come and jump ropes for hours and juggle and be a kid. And in many ways, I think, to me, that's the only real the only real situation of giving up that I've seen in a child. Sleep is death's brother.
Because it sounds a little bit like what you're describing with resignation syndrome.
In many ways, when you were now talking about discussing why this only happens to children, to me it's evident that it only happens to children because they are the future, and they are the ones refusing that future as it looks and as it stands right now. I think it's in a way a very self-determining thing to do, saying, I don't want to be part of this. I do not want anything with the future I am inheriting from you, and I will tune out. And that can mean sleep, and that can mean death. It's just a very active refusal to me of that reality. And in other ways also, and I was thinking of that yesterday watching the opera, I was thinking that they are the ones seemingly sleeping, but they are closer to awareness, they are closer to reality, in the same way that people are closer to reality in places of hardship. So, I was thinking yesterday, are we the ones who are asleep, or are they asleep? So for me, children, just by nature of virtue of being closer to the truth, they have an easier way of finding their way back to the truth. And to me, yesterday, I was really watching it as their sleep being a state of heightened awareness that we don't have access to.
That's sort of what happens in the dream sequences, where what's actually reality and what isn't gets all mixed up, and you say that.
And in many ways, that part of their being as old souls, and when I say old souls, I really mean ancient souls, like people with ancient knowledge about what is real, what life is about, where beauty is. That was something that I was really seeing in the children, or the representation of children we have in the piece.
When you all look at the characters that you've created and the situation you've created in the opera, you look at you hear strains of what terrible things have brought them to wherever they are in camps or wherever, and you think, and I wonder whether you feel pity for them, whether you feel respect for them, whether you feel just sad for them or hope for them. I mean, how do you feel about this world that you've recreated in the opera?
It's a love story. I think we fall in love with them, and so the feeling is more complicated than any of those other emotions. Like it goes back to the Greek theater and Greek mythology of pity, terror, love, fear, all wrapped into one thing. And I think what we like to, or what I hope to experience is having, there are certain moments when, or rather, like we meet each other in a certain way on the sidewalk or on the street, but sometimes we have opportunities to meet with someone and it gets deep really quickly, and you really fall in love with someone instantly, and they are able to share their spirit. And in this case, they share their stories. And back to the idea of Ruinous Gods, I mean, each of them have their own ideas of, they're not even ideas, each of them have their gods of what's chased them to be where they are, and also God's guiding them to where they're going. And they kind of express that to each other and find connection. So I hope that it creates connection.
Is what you've written based on actual testimony from people who are in or have been in camps and have been recorded, or what they've said written down?
I always do a lot of research and then I try to forget the research. So there are stories that resemble or mirror or shadow people's stories in actuality, but because I was so concerned with what Omar just named for us, the transmission of the wound, with the sort of metaphysical idea that that can happen, but that is also a source of healing. The same wound is the same place of healing. So I was thinking in terms of not specifically Maya's grandfather coming to Florida or my grandfather coming to Manitoba, but that these stories happen in these ways in a last generation, and then they happen in these ways in this generation, just like we didn't locate it specifically geographically, that stories that happen through Central America relate to stories that happen in Syria, and weaving the humanity of the stories. So, yes and no.
Are you also saying that it happens again and again and again and again and again, the war and the piece is really critical of war and the United States as complicit in war. So what's going on there?
When we identify that space, that wound, I think that's exactly the space where we can reconnect and heal. I know that's a simplistic way to think about it. The piece and I are critical of militaristic solutions because I think the piece speaks to this as well. I mean, the beginning is by using these tools of civilization that we have, which are diplomacy, language, love, connection, alternative creativity, imagination, thinking in new ways. And I think that's where the edges it presses at.
When you think about the people who are affected by all of this, in reality, I'm sure everybody here has in their mind pictures of people being dragged through concertina wire at the Texas-Mexico border, or seeing people in bombed-out rubble in Syria, and people who are on crowded boats in the Mediterranean, and the wreckage in Gaza, and so on and so forth. And they're saying, well, this is all really tragic, but we can't take everybody in the world here. And yet the opera it says there's at one point it talks about all these people with their white dinner table, white linen dinner tables, and so on. What are you saying? Are you saying the world can take them all, or this is all really sad? A lot of people in this country, this is a very controversial issue, and they're saying, well, it's very sad to see these pictures, but.
So the opera is a work of art, and it presents a picture of a metaphorical world with characters, and it asks a lot of questions, and it doesn't answer the questions. For instance, it doesn't answer the question, what do I think we should do? Should we take all the people in? Because it actually doesn't ask that question. It asks questions to offer to us to ask more questions. So in a way, you asking that question is what it's asking us to do. To ask ourselves, well, what might we do? What shall we do? What are alternatives to the things we do? It's offering us the space, I hope, to sit together in a room all together with our bodies and ask ourselves and feel the heat and the breath of each other together and ask ourselves, can we take the time to ask these questions together in a different way than we've been asking them?
Toward the end, the character of the mother turns and stands and faces the audience and speaks. She doesn't sing, and there's a whole. It's like a message. It's like a viewpoint, and I'm curious as to why you decided to have her speak that section, which is clearly a plea or an argument in favor of granting asylum and so on and so forth. It breaks the kind of the atmosphere of the musical part, and you must have done it for a reason. And I'm curious as to what you all have to say about that.
Well, that was mostly a musical decision. It's actually I intended for that text not to be put in music. I prefer to put it in music from the background with children's voices. I think when looking at that piece, it is very challenging to sublimate and to beautify such a subject to the point of it becoming an object of beauty in the same way you would admire a beautiful sculpture or.
So the beautiful music, the beautiful language.
And so walking that fine thread of basking in the beauty of destitution, I think it's important to take a step and wake up and look at it just for a few minutes, from a much more direct, naked point of view, just for what it really truly is. Otherwise, it would be talking about what is happening or what has been inflicted on, while completely missing the opportunity to explain how deeply where the roots are. And the roots are not pretty. We can't sing about them. There's nothing beautiful about talking about artillery and weapons. Why would I embellish that text in music? It's not a beautiful text. It's a powerful text. It's not a beautiful text. It's the same reason why doctors aren't singing at the end. They're speaking. There's nothing beautifying or that deserves to be elevated to song in that text. So in many ways, it's a decision that is musical, but it's also a decision to deprive some lines of music so that you really hear them for what they are, to the sound of silence. And in contrast with what you heard before and what you're about to hear later, I think silence is as important and vital in a musical piece as music, because without the sound of silence, the music itself doesn't make sense. And so some lines afford to be delivered in a direct way because they will come to you, or you will receive them from a different standpoint than you will receive the music. We're speaking to emotions, we're speaking to empathy, but we're also speaking about reality. And sometimes reality is as simple as an enumeration of facts amidst a musification of everything else. So I thought I really needed that balance, and it was a choice. I don't know that in the next iteration we'll keep it. That's a subject of debate, and even amongst us. But I think that's what's interesting about a work of art. We can always debate about choices and about ideas and how to present them and what is the best way to present them.
you enumerate actual numbers of just tell us here now those numbers of displaced people and how they've grown and so on.
Mm-hmm. This is also relating to the style of the piece, which is, in a way, we don't say it's not quite Brechtian, but we are very aware that it's not realism or naturalism. I mean, we have grown adults playing children. We don't always know if the doctors are they actually doctors, or are they these characters playing the doctors that they've met. We don't always know these things. We're hearing the stories. And so the actual numbers, when I started this project in 2014, were that 58 million people were forcibly displaced. And now there are 110, possibly 114 million people forcibly displaced, and that's over 10 years. And nearly half of those people are children. And there was a recent study on the liberty of children that 400,000 children were detained in jail-like situations and completely deprived of liberty. So these are the numbers that I do follow, and there's a juxtaposition between the strikingness of these numbers and facts about weaponry, people, with the elevation of imagination and imaginative characters. And that, I personally love those juxtapositions because I think they click my brain,
So in a way that it's like the more there's artillery and weaponry, the more the children resort to the pictures in their minds and what they imagine, or the dreamlike quality in order to survive.
Yes,
is that what you're saying?
Yes, and I'm also asking us to imagine in different ways than we talk about daily, which are more in line with Martin Luther King or Thich Nhat Hanh, who are actually believe in peace, that believe peace is possible. And what does it take for us to cultivate culturally an imagination that yearns for and desires and believes in peace? And so I know, again, that when you ask a question like, what should we do at the border, sometimes I believe we have to kind of shift our gaze and ask ourselves, what would be the possibilities? If we were willing to commit to peace, each one of us, how would we see this question differently? Because it may not be, again, a black and white answer, do we let them in or do we not let them in? It may be more of a matter of sharing housing, sharing properties, sharing landscapes, sharing spaces that are safe. And that's just a different kind of imagination than we're used to when we talk about displaced people. Do we let them in? Do we not let them in?
Now, one of the things with the three of you who've worked with people who have been in those situations and have come from the backgrounds you've come from, the opera, in the opera there are guards who regard the people in the camps as dirty pigeons, and there's a sense of lost identity, that nobody knows who we are, nobody knows who we are, and nobody knows when we left, and so on. There's this loss of identity and this dismissal as disrespected birds, and so on. Did you find that among the people that you worked with and did theater for? That kind of sense of that's how they were treated, and the psychological effect that it might have.
Constantly.
And how did it manifest itself?
There is a huge fear of cops in the camps in general. It's
of what?
Of the cops, of law
enforcement or
law enforcement.
Law enforcement, and there is a real agenda of dehumanization of those persons. In the sense where in France, for example, they put them in camps they call it houses of shelters, but they take them from the camps and they put them in something more that looks more like a prison. I'm speaking about my experience in France or in Serbia, and those places they are not allowed to go out from them unless they have certain kind of permission, and they are assigned numbers and colors, and they are in the city they are constantly in search of those people. The cops are searching for them all over Calais, so that they come back to this what is so-called jungle and do not get out of it. Health care for them is like if somebody is dying in the camp, unless he's dying, it's very difficult to get health care for them. I remember a situation where we had to shout on the ambulance to arrive to where the person was, because the person wasn't able to move, and the police was forbidding the ambulance to arrive to that tent to take the person there. Yes, there is a clear agenda on the media, on the field, on the floor, on the ground, to dehumanize refugees.
Doing theater with them and for them, how did that affect them? I mean, what did it provide? A therapeutic benefit, or was it something that they could find themselves in? I mean, you created theater for them and with them, so how did that affect them? They have nothing. They're in a camp. They're sort of imprisoned. So if doing theater, what did that do for them?
I mean, it really depends on the time we spend. So we've had different experiences. When we spend more time with people, there is a therapeutic, I would say, there is a therapeutic element, definitely. You see people change, because theater changes you. All theater changes you when you watch it and when you work in it. So yes, it changes the way you relate to others, the way you relate to your body, the way you position yourself within a group. So definitely there's a change. But when it comes to working in very momentary situations, like in Calais or in Serbia, these are very short periods of work, especially that people are in transit, and some of them actually managed to escape. Like some of the people we were working with, we didn't have them the next day because they escaped to the UK. So it's really like a very volatile and transitory situation.
You could argue, I mean, I suppose some people would say, well, doing theater for people who are in these camps and have gone through what they've gone through, that's sort of like putting a Band-Aid on something, but it draws out something important.
Yes, because there's a lot of time, there's a lot of, as someone was saying, people sleep, but also they're in an urgent situation, but they also have nothing to do. So in most of the time, it's also a way to connect and to express. And we use theater as a means to create a blank page where people can say and do whatever they like in a context that is safe and that respects the safety and the freedom of others. So in a way, it's a rehearsal for life. It's rehearsing how you want to exist as an individual with others. And the way we work is always about creating a non-judgmental space where the differences don't matter anymore. And so in a way, it's a civil rehearsal. And it's very liberating because it just teaches us and everybody that there is another way to relate to each other. And I go back to your question about how we relate to the characters. We relate to them with equality, I would say. I wanted to say that because, and it's not a humanistic or idealistic way. It's really like looking at the complexity of the other. Some of them are thieves. Some of them maybe have killed someone or have done violence. I don't know. But at this moment, I'm relating to this person in front of me who is making choices that allow everybody to be expressive and to be heard. So it's really about existing in the moment, in the here and now of the theater and life, where you are able to connect and relate and think how to move forward, rather than judge and, sit down and give, punish or judge or put labels on people. It's about moving forward.
Is this opera meant to be a political statement? No?
It's art. That's my. Do you have other thoughts?
The thing is, there are many. When you say today ceasefire, to me it's a humane begging to stop the killing. But for others, it can be a very political statement. So it's really, that's not our intention, but I can see why it might be interpreted as political, is my answer. The word political is very relative. It's very relative. To us, we're talking about a truth that is evident to us. It's just, for me, it's an undeniable experience because it's somebody's lived experience. How can you deny that? But it's not to say that we cannot expect people to feel that it is arriving to them as a political statement. We cannot control that part, even though it's not our intention.
I think we should open it up to questions now. Could I please have the house lights up so that I can actually see the questioners, please? A little more, please, because I can just barely see people. Does anybody have any questions? Thanks. Sir?
Omar, when you spoke about the magic, it reminded me, I can't remember the phrase you used, but it reminded me of Fuad Agami's posthumous memoir, When Magic Failed. And I thought of that as about Arab nationalism, how that illusion, that magical way of thinking failed. But you brought up sort of I guess all of you have, the Arabs' self-delusion about their magical reality and their fantastical existence, past, present, future, whatever. I wonder if you can make some of those connections, or...
I was really speaking about the particularity of Lebanon and the way we enter in a denial of seeing the reality of the country we are living in, far from any political ideologies. And on the contrary, it's a nostalgia of the past that never existed, or existed also for a small bourgeoisie, Lebanese bourgeoisie. And we imagine all the time that we are living in that state that is kind of a magical world, but actually maybe have never existed, is not existent, and will never exist. It's more about that illusion that is transmitted also from generation to generations in Lebanon.
Is that human nature? Is that human nature, not just something that happens in Lebanon?
No, this is really a particularity of Lebanon. And you spoke about Paris of the Middle East. We all the time had that proud of being, of once upon a time, we was the Paris of the Middle East. But the Paris of Middle East that people speak about, even in the newspaper, was existent in one or two streets in Beirut, and the rest of the country was not that Paris. Maybe Paris today, as it's really in a bad situation, but not the ideal Paris.
But it's also true that we are also the generation who lived the failure of the Arab dream. So there was this dream of an Arab nation that also disintegrated, and we are the sons and daughters of this dream or magic situation where Arabs come together and create a nation with Abdel Nasser and all that. So yeah, I understand that in that sense as well. There's this shattered dream that never actually existed.
Yeah, the shattered
But
dream.
for our generation, it lasted, I think, few days because they made a single song for the Arab, where all the Arabs were singing together, or singers from all the Arab worlds were singing together in peace. But it was a song, it was a hit that lasted for 3 months, and then everybody forgot the Arab unity and the Arab nation. It was, yeah, also, your question is actually spot on.
The gentleman in the middle, the microphone is coming your way.
I have a musical question. I heard mostly a lamentation starting with the Aramaic hymns. And I thought maybe you will talk about lullabies or dissonance or anger. I didn't hear them in the music. I'm sure you had your own ideas. And what were you thinking in terms of musical, emotional palette of the opera?
So the first piece is actually, are you referring to the opening?
The opening continued in my mind, or to my ear. The lamentation continued all the time, and basically a commentary of this sad situation. And I don't know whether you had other themes in mind I didn't hear, and that is why I want to be illuminated on that.
So actually the opening is actually, it's a prayer. It's not a lamentation. It's actually quite exalting of, just for context, it's a prayer to the goddess Ishtar, who is basically the goddess of life, of love, of fecundity, of reproduction. And it's actually more an incantation based on the actual text, Aramaic, Babylonian text, scriptures, than an actual lamentation. But then that incantation, for me, channels from being recited to the goddess Ishtar to actually the people we are facing. So this is how I see it. I did not, I think, there are a few lullabies that the mother sings to her daughter. I do not think of rage as an interesting palette to tap into for this story. The protagonists never tap emotionally in the text from a place of rage. It's actually quite opposite. There's, in the context of something so tragic, there's always elements of humor and lightness and irony and sarcasm. And I thought that was much more interesting to highlight than force on them a feeling they should be feeling, whether it is rage or anger or bitterness. And to go back a little bit to what we were talking about, these are of course feelings that are in the human nature, and that are, of course, we all feel, especially when we are in a situation of distress. But I would say they are much less prominent and much less interesting and monochrome than that display of dignity and lightness and lightheartedness that people display, that are just much more interesting and important to highlight. And for me, it is always about highlighting those two layers at once, the tragic, but also the funny, the beautiful, and the horrid. So I hope that answers a little bit your question. Thank you.
Anybody else? Oh, this gentleman over here.
When you write in a libretto, I can't drive a boat.
Are you making reference to refugees who were forced to use at gunpoint to rob boats and subsequently arrested as smugglers?
I didn't hear the end of your question.
And subsequently arrested as smugglers?
I was alluding to that, yes. And again, it's lifted, it's imaginative, it doesn't go into different or specific instances or testimonies or news stories, but yes, it does allude to that.
The lady right there.
I saw it last night, and I maybe should have had the conversation first. It would have reduced the amount of linearity in my thinking, which I think would have helped. But there were two moments I still want to ask about. But if you think I shouldn't, let me know. One is how it ends, i.e. with the children on stage who appear to be very happy. Is that okay so far?
Yes.
Of course.
And the other is when there's sort of a breakout of joy about 2/3 through and spaghetti coming down on the stage, and what those moments were about. I won't say represented.
For the children, that it's a moment where I, for myself, believe that we all could have been in that situation. And I see, what if my daughter was one of those kids? And my daughter was actually on stage. And it helped me reconnect, because when we were saying there's an agenda of dehumanizing refugees, we forget that we are all potential refugees. All our children are potential refugees. And I myself am a potential refugee. And I needed for the end of this opera not to feel far away from it. And why smiling? Because also they are not. And happiness also in kids is unquestionable. Happiness in kids in refugee camps is unquestionable, in the sense where I cannot for myself decide if those kids are happy or not. I cannot define happiness. So we wanted to end on this hope note, that even though we are living in a catastrophe situation, this is a catastrophe situation, this is a completely unhuman situation, it's still human, and happiness still exists inside it, and we could be part of it, of this humanity. That could be us. I hope that answers the question about the last scene. And as for the spaghetti scene, it's a moment where it's completely an absurd moment in the libretto, and not that absurd. And we wanted to create that moment where it's not clear what is happening. It's a moment of joy, but it's a moment that announces tragedy. It's the moment. That moment is when we have the story, inside story, dramaturgical story, where we have the impression all the characters are going in a car to have a night out of fun, but they forget from where they are coming. And this is why they play with the cops, and the cops will tell them, no, you cannot go to those neighborhoods that are not done for those kinds of kids, and they are having fun with the kids, and one of the kids gets shot at a moment. So the spaghettis are actually there to add a festive moment, to create a cut in the scenography, and the rock, and everything, to be a kind of hiding what is really happening, but also to create a fence between the audience and these people. It's the only moment where we can really see a fence somehow. Maybe it was not clear, but the idea is also really to create a fence.
So the little girl at the end, Hala, when she rises up with the wings, are we supposed? I couldn't tell whether that meant she was when her mother is saying, "Wake up, wake up." Does she die?
We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know. We keep asking that question, but I think this is.
I mean, to me, the opera ends, the story ends, and the children take over when the opera ends.
Say again?
To me, the opera ends when the children take over the opera house. This is how I like to think of it. And I don't know, Lisa can also speak about that, but for me, I cannot conceive of such a drastic decision as the child is dead. Yeah. That almost undoes everything else that has happened before.
I mean, I wonder, is it an unbearable feeling to not know? I mean, I feel that it's somewhat unbearable to not know, and yet at the same time, it is a feeling I'm familiar with that holds me in time and space in a suspended way that yes and no, right and wrong, don't do for me. I have an answer for the end of my movie of Hala, and it's hopeful, and it's a hopeful answer because it's like a moment where her mother says, "Come back. The seasons are turning. The snow geese are coming back. Wake up." So simple. And again, it's like back to the questions of like, can we ask questions that allow us to pause and say, I don't know. And then when we sit in the experience of I don't know, what other questions come to us? I don't expect that they'll bring us a new question that asks us a right or wrong answer. My hope is that brings us to a new question that asks us to pause and hold that. And then that experience will bring us to a new place. So my sense of it is it's a hopeful ending because there's connection between Hala, her mother, Crow coming back from another world, or a crow of her imagination that is her dream of being an artist that could wake her up, and these children who come into our world that we recognize in this space, who are real children and they're here with us, and we're here with us. And I know that unknowing is uncomfortable, but in a way we hold that. We're able to hold that in other genres. There's something about theater that makes us want like that ending. Yeah.
All the threads tied up neatly.
Yes. But if you think of film, there are many more films that leave us with an ambiguous ending, and we have to walk away from them and take a walk through the city or through the woods and think about, what was that ending? We have the feeling and we hold the feeling. There's something about theater, we always want the ending. Like maybe Aristotle did that to us. I don't know, but I think this opera is asking us to just hold that suspended moment of not knowing and what that feels like.
I think that's a good place to end. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.